The wind howled across the barren mountaintop, yet Nera felt nothing. She hadn't truly felt anything for thousands of years. Her form, something between light and matter, shimmered faintly against the gray stone. The chains that bound her arms and legs pulsed with a sickly blue energy, designed specifically to contain a being of her nature. From her perch at the highest point of this forgotten world, Nera watched another sunrise. How many had she seen? Millions, perhaps. Time had lost meaning. Another day, she whispered to no one. Her voice, once powerful enough to move stars, now barely carried beyond her lips. Nera turned her gaze upward. The stars were beginning to fade with the coming dawn, but she knew each one by name. Over the centuries, she had watched some die in brilliant explosions, others born in swirling cosmic clouds. She had witnessed entire civilizations rise and fall through her distant observations, all while she remained frozen in place, unchanged by time. The chains tightened slightly as she shifted position. They always did when she directed her thoughts outward, as if the Vorgar technology could sense her desire to be free. The Vorgar. Even now, thousands of years later, thinking of them brought a flash of anger hot enough to briefly intensify her glow. The Vorgar Imperium had been expanding its reach across the galaxy when Nera first encountered them. She remembered how they appeared on peaceful worlds with their massive warships, demanding resources and obedience. Most species had no choice but to submit. The few who resisted were crushed without mercy. Nera's own people, the Alari, were energy beings who had evolved beyond physical form. They had adopted a strict policy of non-interference with younger races, content to observe rather than intervene. But Nera had been different. She couldn't watch the suffering. Was it worth it? She asked herself, as she had countless times before. In her memory, she saw the faces of the people she had saved. The children of Paraxis IV, whose atmosphere the Vorgar had begun to poison. The ancient libraries of the Talasians, nearly burned by Vorgar troops before she spirited them away. For decades, she had moved secretly through the galaxy, countering Vorgar atrocities where she could, until they caught her. The Vorgar had devoted significant resources to capturing her. Their scientists had developed the technology in her chains specifically to contain an Alari. The fact that they had succeeded still surprised her. That single moment of overconfidence had cost her everything. A distant rumble caught her attention. Far below, at the base of the mountain, dust rose as rocks tumbled down a slope. Some small animal, perhaps. This planet had once teemed with life, before the Vorgar stripped it of valuable minerals and moved on. Now only the hardiest creatures remained, scratching out existence in the wastelands. Like her, Nera knew what the Vorgar told others about her. Their propaganda had reached even this remote place through the occasional patrol ship that came to check her bonds. She was a dangerous goddess who had sought to destroy the Imperium. Her capture and imprisonment were necessary for galactic peace and stability. What a joke. The Vorgar Imperium had grown more powerful without her interference. They controlled hundreds of worlds now. Their patrol ships visited less frequently as centuries passed. Once every few decades now, barely a blink to an immortal being like Nera. Each time, the officers looked different. Their uniforms changed with shifting fashions, but their arrogance remained the same. The prisoner remained secure, they would note in their logs, barely glancing at her before leaving. To them, she was just a relic of their history, a trophy of their ancestors' victory. A small, six-legged creature scurried across the rocks near her. Nera watched it with interest. Life always found a way to persist, even here in this desolation. The creature paused, sensing her presence, then darted into a crack in the stone. "I won't hurt you," Nera said, though she knew the creature couldn't understand. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, unused for so long. "Nothing to fear from me anymore." She gazed down at the valley below. From her vantage point, she could see the ruins of what had once been a Vorgar mining operation. Nature had reclaimed much of it, breaking down the structures with roots and weather. Given enough time, perhaps even the mountain itself would crumble, and her with it. But Nera knew better. Her chains were designed to last forever. The Vorger had made certain of that. As the sun climbed higher, Nera closed her eyes. She didn't need to sleep, but she had learned to retreat into a meditative state that helped pass the endless time. In this state, she could almost feel connected to the cosmic energy that flowed through all living things, almost, but not quite. The chains prevented true connection. A sudden, unfamiliar sound broke her meditation, a mechanical whirring, different from the Vorger shifts she had come to recognize. Nera opened her eyes. Far below, at the edge of the ruined mining complex, something gleamed in the sunlight. Something new had landed. Nera's form brightened slightly with interest, the first real change in her emotional state in centuries. The chains tightened in response, sending painful energy through her ethereal body. She dimmed herself quickly, but continued watching. A figure emerged from the strange vessel, too distant to see clearly, but the shape seemed wrong for a Vorger. Vorger were tall, with 4 arms and narrow heads. This figure was smaller, moving with a different gait. For the first time in millennia, Nera felt something new: curiosity. The figure appeared to be examining the ruins, taking samples, recording data, a researcher of some kind. The Vorger weren't known for scholarly pursuits. They took what they wanted and moved on. Over the next several days, Nera watched the visitor explore the abandoned complex. Occasionally, they would look up toward the mountain peak where she was chained, but made no move to approach. Perhaps they couldn't see her from that distance, or perhaps they had heard the stories and were afraid. On the 5th day, the visitor began to climb. Nera felt an unfamiliar sensation in her chest, something like hope, though she tried to suppress it. Hope was dangerous after so long. The chains sensed her emotion and constricted painfully, but she couldn't help herself. Someone new was coming, someone who wasn't Vorger. The climb took hours. The visitor was persistent, finding paths up the steep mountainside that even Nera hadn't noticed in her centuries of observation. As they came closer, Nera could see that they wore a protective suit with a clear helmet. Inside was a face unlike any she had seen before. The visitor stopped about 20 paces from her, staring in what seemed like wonder. Nera stared back. After an eternity of solitude, she faced something unexpected. A member of a species she had never encountered, standing before her without fear. The chains hummed warningly as Nera allowed herself to glow just a little brighter. She didn't speak, waiting to see what this strange new being would do. Would they run? Attack? Worship? Instead, the visitor did something Nera never expected. They waved. Dr. Jum checked his equipment one more time before stepping out of his small research vessel. The air on this planet was thin but breathable, with a faint metallic smell that tickled his nose. He adjusted the settings on his atmospheric filter and took a deep breath. Research log, Day 1. He spoke into his recorder. I've landed near what appears to be an abandoned mining facility on planet XR47. The Interstellar Survey Corps data shows this planet was once used by the Vorger Imperium, then abandoned over 2,000 years ago. Jum was excited to be here. As a xenorchaeologist from Earth, he specialized in studying alien ruins and artifacts. Earth had only joined the interstellar community 50 years ago, making humans newcomers to a galaxy filled with ancient civilizations. There was so much history to learn, so many stories buried in forgotten places like this. He shouldered his pack and began walking toward the crumbling structures at the base of a tall mountain. The buildings were mostly reclaimed by the planet's hardy vegetation, with roots and vines breaking through concrete-like materials. Jum took samples and images as he explored, noting the distinctive angular architecture of Vorger design. Fascinating, he muttered to himself as he uncovered a partially intact control panel. This facility appears to have been abandoned in a hurry, equipment left behind, personal items still in quarters. As the day progressed, Jun worked methodically through the ruins. His translator device helped him decipher the few intact inscriptions he found. Most were mundane: inventory lists, work schedules, warning signs. Nothing that explained why the Vorgar had left. Near sundown, Jones set up his camp in what once had been an administration building. As he prepared his evening meal, he noticed his energy scanner blinking with an alert. He frowned, picking up the device. "That's odd," he said, adjusting the settings. "There's a significant energy source coming from up there." June stepped outside and looked up at the mountain looming above the facility. The peak was shrouded in the day's last light, looking ominous against the darkening sky. His scanner indicated a steady energy signature emanating from somewhere near the summit. "Nothing in the core database mentions an energy source here," he said, checking his files. "Could be natural, but these readings don't match any known geological patterns." June's curiosity was piqued. He decided to investigate the mountain the next morning. Dawn came quickly on this planet with its shorter rotation cycle. After a light breakfast, June packed climbing gear and extra sensors. The climb would be challenging but not impossible. His Earth physiology, adapted to higher gravity, gave him an advantage on this lighter world. Research log, Day 2, he recorded as he began his ascent. "I'm investigating an unusual energy signature at the mountain peak. Initial readings suggest artificial origin, possibly Vorgar technology still functioning after millennia." The climb was arduous despite his physiological advantages. Sharp rocks cut into his gloves, and the thin air made him stop frequently to catch his breath. His scanner beeped more insistently as he climbed higher, confirming he was moving in the right direction. Midway up, Joan found what appeared to be a deliberately constructed path. It was overgrown and damaged by time, but clearly not natural. "This path was made intentionally," he noted. "Why build a path to the top of a mountain on a planet you're only mining temporarily?" As he climbed higher, his translator device started to pick up faint signals. The screen flickered with partial translations from ancient Vorgar. "Danger. Prisoner. DIT. Approach forbidden." June frowned. Prisoner. What could the Vorgar have imprisoned here? The sun was high overhead when June finally neared the summit. His energy scanner was now beeping constantly, the readings off the charts. He pulled himself up over a final ledge and stood on a flat area at the peak. At first he saw nothing unusual, just bare rock and a few hardy plants clinging to cracks. Then he saw her. In the center of the summit area, a translucent figure hovered slightly above the ground. She appeared humanoid, but was clearly not human. Her body seemed made of light and energy rather than flesh. Strange metallic bands wrapped around her wrists, ankles, and neck, connected to chains that anchored into the mountain itself. The chains pulsed with blue energy that seemed to flow into and through the figure. June's translator went wild. "Warning. Dangerous DIT commentained. Do not APPROH. Do not communicate. Report immediately to VU or GAR authorities." June silenced the device. He stood very still, unsure how to proceed. His scientific training urged caution, but his human curiosity pushed him forward. The being, for it was clearly alive, watched him with eyes that seemed to contain galaxies. Slowly, carefully, June approached until he stood about 20 paces away. The figure made no threatening moves. She simply observed him with what appeared to be the same curiosity he felt. After a moment of silence, June did the most human thing he could think of. He raised his hand and waved. The luminous being tilted her head slightly, studying the gesture. Then, to June's amazement, she raised her own hand in return, the chain at her wrist jingling faintly. "Hello," June said softly. "I'm Dr. June from Earth. Can you understand me?" His translator remained silent. Either it couldn't translate his words for the being, or it was programmed not to. The figure spoke, her voice like music but incomprehensible to June. She gestured to his translator. June hesitated, then switched it back on. "Long since I've spoken to anyone. The translator rendered in a flat voice, nothing like the melodious sound she had made. "Who are you, strange one? You are not Vorgar." "No, I'm human," Jun said, his heart racing with excitement. "From Earth. We're relatively new to space travel." "Human," she repeated, the word seeming strange in her mouth. "I have not heard of your kind before." June took a careful step closer. "And you? What are you? Who are you?" "I am Nera," she said, her form brightening slightly. The chains immediately pulsed stronger, and she dimmed in response. "I am, or was, of the Alari." "The Alari?" June checked his database. "There's no record of your species in our files." "There wouldn't be," Nera said. "My people preferred not to be known, and the Vorgar have likely erased much of our history." June glanced at the chains binding her. "These are Vorgar technology. They're imprisoning you." "For millennia," Nera confirmed. "You should not be here, human. If the Vorgar discover you speaking with me, they will kill you." June's scientific mind was racing. An unknown alien species, imprisoned using technology that had remained functional for thousands of years. This was the discovery of a lifetime. "Why did they imprison you?" he asked, taking another step closer. Nera's form flickered like a candle in wind. "They would tell you I am dangerous, a threat to galactic peace, and the truth." Nera studied him for a long moment. "I opposed their conquest. I protected those who could not protect themselves." June looked around the barren mountaintop, trying to process what he was hearing. His training had taught him to be objective, to gather data before forming conclusions. But something in Nera's voice, a weariness, a resignation born of endless suffering, struck a deeply human chord in him. "No one has tried to free you?" he asked. "Few know I exist," Nera said. "And those who do believe the Vorgar tales. The patrols come less often now. Eventually, they may forget me entirely." June took out his scanner and slowly approached one of the chains. "May I?" Nera nodded. The readings were unlike anything June had seen before. The technology was far beyond Earth's capabilities, using principles of physics he barely understood. But it was technology, not magic, and technology could be understood, perhaps even disabled. "I need to learn more," June said, looking up at Nera. "About you, about why you're here, about these chains. Why would you help me?" Nera asked, her voice soft. "You know nothing about me. I could be exactly what the Vorgar claim." June smiled slightly. "I'm a scientist. I don't accept claims without evidence. And," he hesitated, "on Earth, we have a saying, innocent until proven guilty." For the first time, something like hope flickered in Nera's luminous eyes. "Then, human June," she said, "let me tell you my story." June sat cross-legged on the hard stone of the mountaintop, his equipment spread around him. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the barren peak. He had been here for hours, listening to Nera speak about her past. "You should leave this place," Nera said, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to press on June's chest. "The Vorgar patrol might come at any time. It has been nearly 30 years since their last visit, which means they are due soon." June shook his head, adjusting the settings on his scanner. "I can't just walk away. Not now that I found you." "Many have died opposing the Vorgar," Nera warned. "My imprisonment was meant to be a lesson." "Then I'd better learn everything I can," June replied with a small smile. He aimed his scanner at one of the pulsing chains. "These bonds are fascinating. The technology is unlike anything we have on Earth." Nera watched him work with growing curiosity. It had been so long since she had spoken to anyone. The last beings to address her directly had been Vorgar officers, their voices full of scorn and fear. This human was different. He showed no fear, only interest and something else she had almost forgotten: kindness. "Tell me about your people," June said as he recorded data. "The Alari. You said they were energy beings." Nera's form brightened slightly before the chains pulsed. forcing her to dim again. Yes, we evolved beyond physical bodies millennia ago. We exist as conscious energy, able to move freely through space. Like pure consciousness? June asked, fascinated. Not exactly. We still have form, as you can see, but it is energy given shape by our will, not flesh constrained by biology. June nodded, trying to understand. And you lived peacefully until the Vorger came. The Aleri believed in non-interference, Nora explained. We watched younger species develop, but never intervened. The universe has its own order, my people said. But you disagreed. Nera's form shifted, the closest thing to a sigh she could manage. When the Vorger began their expansion, I saw the suffering they caused. Entire species enslaved or exterminated, planets stripped of resources and left barren. My people refused to act, saying it was not our place to interfere. But you couldn't stand by and watch, Jun said softly. No. Nara's voice grew stronger. I left my people. For decades, I worked alone, helping evacuate worlds before Vorger forces arrived, sabotaging their weapons, hiding refugees. The Vorger called me a terrorist, the destroyer, but I never took a single life. June looked up from his scanner. They fear what they don't understand. They fear what they cannot control, Nara corrected. The Vorger build their empire on absolute obedience. My actions showed others that resistance was possible. As night fell completely, June turned on a small light. Its glow complemented Nara's natural luminescence, creating pools of soft light amid the darkness. How did they capture you? He asked. A trap, Nara said, her voice hollow with remembered pain. They threatened to destroy a planet with billions of innocent lives. I came to stop them, not realizing the threat was a lure. They had developed technology specifically to contain an Aleri. These chains, she moved slightly, making the bonds jingle. We're waiting for me. June frowned, studying his readings. The chains seem to inhibit your natural energy state. They force you to remain in this form, prevent you from leaving. Yes, and they draw power from me, creating a cycle I cannot break. The more I resist, the stronger they become. June stood and cautiously approached one of the anchor points where a chain disappeared into solid rock. Incredible engineering. They must have spent years developing this technology. The Vorger are nothing if not determined, Nera said. Once I was captured, they spread stories about me throughout the galaxy. They said I was a dangerous deity who sought to destroy civilizations. That my imprisonment was necessary for galactic peace. And no one questioned this. Who would? The Vorger controlled most interstellar communication. Few had the power to challenge them. June returned to sit closer to Nera. Night on this planet was cold, and he pulled his thermal jacket tighter. What happened to your people? The other Aleri. Nera was silent for a long moment. I do not know. After my capture, the Vorger launched a campaign against them. My people were peaceful, not warriors. I heard rumors they fled to another galaxy, but I cannot be certain. I may be the last of my kind in this part of the universe. The sadness in her voice touched something deep inside June. As a xenorchaeologist, he had studied many extinct civilizations, but he had never before met someone who might be the last of their species. I'm sorry, he said simply. Nera's form brightened briefly in surprise. For what, human? For your loss. For your imprisonment. For what was done to you and your people. You bear no responsibility for the actions of the Vorger. No, but I can still feel compassion for your suffering. Nera studied him with her luminous eyes. Compassion is rare in this galaxy, June of Earth. They talked through the night. June told Nera about Earth, its history, its people. He explained how humans had developed faster than light travel only decades ago and were still finding their place among the stars. Nara listened intently, asking questions about human emotions, art, belief systems. Your species is young, she observed, but you see the universe differently than many older races. You question, you explore, You feel deeply. Some would call that a weakness, Jun said with a smile. Perhaps it is your greatest strength. As dawn approached, Jun realized he had been awake for more than 20 hours. Exhaustion caught up with him, and he yawned widely. You need rest, Nara said. I'm fine, Jun insisted, but another yawn betrayed him. Sleep, human. I have nowhere to go, Nara said with a trace of dark humor. Jun nodded reluctantly and prepared a small sleeping area with his gear. Before lying down, he approached Nara once more. I'll find a way to help you, he promised. There must be some way to break these chains. They were designed to be unbreakable, Nara said. The Vorgr made certain of that. Nothing is truly unbreakable. We just haven't found the weakness yet. Nara's form dimmed slightly, her equivalent of a sad smile. Your optimism is refreshing, even if misplaced. Jun didn't know what made him do it. Perhaps it was exhaustion clouding his judgment, or perhaps it was the profound sadness in Nara's voice. Without thinking, he reached out his hand toward what appeared to be her shoulder, a gesture of comfort he would have offered any suffering being. Jun, don't. Nara began, alarm in her voice. But it was too late. His fingers passed into her luminous form. The moment they connected, several things happened at once. A jolt of energy passed through Jun's body, not painful but intense, like static electricity multiplied 100-fold. Nara gasped, a sound Jun hadn't heard her make before. And most surprisingly, the chains binding her flickered, their blue glow sputtering like a faulty circuit. Jun pulled his hand back in shock, staring at his tingling fingers. What just happened? He whispered. Nara's form was bright with agitation, the chains working overtime to dim her. I don't understand. The chains, they weakened when you touched me. Jun looked at his hand, then at Nara, then at the chains. That's impossible. How could my touch affect Vorgr technology? I don't know, Nara said, her voice trembling slightly. In all these centuries, nothing has ever disrupted the bonds, not even for a moment. Jun's scientific mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it's something about human biology. Our electrical field interacting with your energy form in a way the Vorgr never anticipated. The Vorgr designed these chains to contain an Alari regardless of outside interference, Nara said. They accounted for every possibility they knew of. But they never encountered humans, Jun said slowly. We weren't part of the galactic community when these were made. They stared at each other as the implications sank in. Try again, Nara finally said. Please. Cautiously, Jun extended his hand once more. This time, he was prepared for the sensation as his fingers passed into Nara's luminous form. Again, the chains flickered and dimmed momentarily. When he pulled his hand away, the chains resumed their normal pulsing. It's your touch, Nara said, wonder in her voice. After all this time, something the Vorgr never planned for. Hope brightened her form more than Jun had yet seen, the chains struggling to contain her excitement. We need to study this, Jun said, his exhaustion forgotten. Carefully, methodically. If there's a way to use this weakness against the chains, then perhaps I could be free, Nara finished, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she feared speaking the possibility aloud. For the first time in millennia, Nara felt something new growing inside her. Hope, yes, but something more. Connection. In this human who had climbed a mountain out of curiosity and stayed out of compassion, she had found something she thought lost forever. Understanding. For 3 days, Jun barely slept. He worked tirelessly, studying the effect his touch had on Nara's chains. Each morning, he climbed down the mountain to retrieve equipment from his ship, then returned to the summit by afternoon. His face grew stubbly with an unshaven beard, and dark circles formed under his eyes, but excitement kept him going. I think I understand it now, Jun said on the 3rd day, looking up from his instruments. The chains were designed to contain and neutralize Alari energy, But human bioelectrical fields operate on a completely different frequency. Nera watched him with growing hope. And this difference disrupts the containment field. Exactly. Jun pointed to his readings. When I touch you, my bioelectrical field creates a kind of interference pattern. It's temporary, but it weakens the bonds for a few seconds. Nera's form brightened slightly. Could this temporary disruption be enough to free me? Not from a single touch, Jun admitted. But I've been thinking. If I could find the right points in the system and apply sustained contact in a specific sequence. He trailed off, running calculations in his head. You believe it could work? Nera asked, her voice soft with cautious hope. I think so. These chains are connected in a network. If we disrupt certain key points simultaneously, it might create a cascade failure. Jun looked up at her. But Nera, I need to be honest. This is just a theory. I could be wrong. After thousands of years of certainty, uncertainty is a gift, Nera said. Jun smiled at that. He stood and approached the nearest chain anchor point. I've identified 7 critical junctions in the containment system. If my theory is correct, disrupting them in the right sequence could break the entire network. And if your theory is wrong, Jun shrugged, then nothing happens. Or the system could react defensively. Nera finished for him. The Vorgar built in safeguards. An escape attempt might trigger punishment protocols. You mean it could hurt you? Jun said, his face growing serious. Yes, the chains have caused pain before when I tested their limits. Jun hesitated, looking troubled. I don't want to cause you more suffering. The pain of hope is better than the emptiness of resignation, Nera said. I want to try. Jun nodded slowly. All right, let me finish these calculations first. We need to get this exactly right. As the sun began to set, Jun made final adjustments to his plan. He had mapped out each critical junction in the chain network and determined the precise sequence for disruption. Now he was preparing small devices he had built from parts in his ship. These will help extend the effect of my touch, he explained to Nera. I can't be in 7 places at once, but these conductors should carry my bioelectrical field to multiple points simultaneously. Nera watched him work with growing admiration. In all her centuries of existence, she had rarely seen such determination in a being so physically fragile. Why are you doing this? She asked suddenly. You risk much for someone you barely know. Jun's hands paused over his work. He looked up at Nera, considering the question. On Earth, we have a long history of imprisonment and liberation, he said finally, of people punished not for their crimes, but for challenging those in power. When I look at you, I don't see an alien being. I see someone who was punished for trying to help others. He returned to his work, connecting delicate wires. Besides, what kind of scientist would I be if I walked away from the discovery of a lifetime? As night fell completely, Jun was ready. He had positioned his conductors at 6 of the 7 critical junctions. The 7th would require his direct touch. Are you ready? He asked Nera. Yes, she said simply. Jun took a deep breath and placed his hand on the final junction point. On my count. 3, 2, 1. He pressed a button on his wrist device, sending his bioelectrical signature through all 7 conductors simultaneously. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the chains began to flicker wildly, their blue glow wavering like flames in a strong wind. Nera's form brightened dramatically, no longer suppressed by the containment field. It's working, Jun shouted over the sudden whine of failing technology. Nera's form expanded, growing brighter by the second. The chains strained, trying to force her back into her confined state. Jun gritted his teeth, maintaining contact despite the growing heat in the metal beneath his palm. Then came the sound they both dreaded, the distant roar of engines. Jun looked up to see lights cutting through the night sky. A ship was approaching, much larger than his small research vessel. Its design was unmistakable from the historical records he had studied. Vorgar Patrol, he said, his voice tight. They must have detected the disruption in the containment system. Nera's form dimmed with alarm. June, you must go. Now, take your ship and leave before they land. June looked at the approaching vessel, then back at Nera. The chains were still flickering, but had not broken. His attempt had weakened them, but not enough. If I leave now, they'll reinforce your bonds, he said. Everything we've learned will be useless. If you stay, they will kill you. Nera countered. Humans are unknown to them. They will see you as a threat, an accomplice. The Vorger ship was circling now, searching for a landing spot on the mountain. How long until they reached the summit? June asked, his mind racing. 20 minutes, perhaps less. They will need to land below and climb up. June looked at his equipment, then at the failing chains. A plan formed in his mind. 20 minutes might be enough, he said, a new determination hardening his features. We continue. June, I'm not leaving you here, he said firmly. He began adjusting his devices, reconfiguring them with rapid movements. The first attempt weakened the bonds. A second, with modifications, might break them completely. Nera watched him work, conflicted between hope for freedom and fear for his safety. The Vorger will show no mercy. Neither will I, Jum said grimly. Not to injustice. He positioned his modified conductors, working with frantic speed. Below, they could hear the Vorger ship landing, its engines powering down. They're here, Nera said quietly. Let them come, Jun replied. He finished his preparations and stood before Nera. This time, I'll need to touch you directly while the conductors work on the chains. The combined disruption should be enough. Nera's luminous eyes met his. If this fails, it won't, Jun said with more confidence than he felt. He activated the conductors, then reached out both hands toward Nera's form. As his fingers passed into her luminous body, the familiar jolt of energy ran through him. Stronger this time. The chains began to flicker violently, their blue glow turning erratic. Hold on, Jun whispered, fighting to maintain contact as the energy surged through him. From below came shouts in a harsh language Jun didn't understand. His translator picked up fragments. Containment failure. Prisoner. Intruder. The Vorger were climbing fast. Too fast. It's not working quickly enough, Nera said, her voice strained. The bonds are weakening, but too slowly. Jun gritted his teeth, pushing his hands deeper into Nera's energy form. What makes humans special isn't our strength, he gasped through the pain of the mounting energy surge. It's our stubborn refusal to accept what we're told is impossible. The chains were vibrating now, the metal heating to a dull red glow. Jun's arms trembled with the effort of maintaining contact, but he didn't pull away. Humans may be physically weaker than many species, he continued, his voice growing stronger, but we refuse to accept injustice when we see it. The first Vorger soldier appeared at the edge of the summit platform. Tall and four-armed, wearing armor that gleamed in the light from Nera's form, it raised a weapon. Stop immediately, the soldier commanded through a translator. Step away from the prisoner. Jun didn't even look at the soldier. His entire focus was on Nera and the chains that had held her for millennia. Almost there, he whispered to her. Just a little longer. More Vorger soldiers appeared, their weapons trained on Jun. They advanced cautiously, clearly confused by the sight of an unknown species interfering with their ancient prisoner. Final warning, called the lid soldier. Disengage, or we will fire. Jun closed his eyes, channeling every ounce of his being into the connection with Nera. In that moment, he felt something shift, not in the physical world, but in the energy passing between them. A resonance, a harmony of frequencies that had never aligned before. Now, Nera, he said softly. Now. Nera's form surged with brilliant light, expanding outward in all directions. The chains stretched, glowed white-hot, and then, with a sound like 1,000 crystal glasses shattering at once, broke apart. The Vorger soldiers fell back, shielding their eyes from the sudden burst of light. When they looked again, They saw their worst nightmare. Nara, unchained and radiant, hovering above the mountain peak with June standing beside her, his hands still raised in contact with her luminous form. The lead Vorgr raised his weapon. Containment failure. Execute emergency protocols. But before he could fire, Nara's form expanded further, enveloping June in a protective sphere of light. As the first Vorgar weapons discharge, their energy beams struck the sphere and dissipated harmlessly. The soldiers stared in disbelief, then began to retreat in panic. Inside the protective sphere, June looked at Nara in wonder. Her form had changed, growing more defined and infinitely more powerful. She was magnificent. "You did it," he breathed. "We did it," Nara corrected, her voice resonating with new strength. "And now we must decide what comes next." The Vorgr soldiers had reached the edge of the summit, calling desperately into their communicators for backup. But both June and Nara knew it was too late. After thousands of years, the prisoner was free. And humanity had just announced its presence to the galaxy in a way no one could ignore. The mountain shook as the last of Nara's chains shattered. Fragments of glowing metal scattered across the stone, then dissolved into nothing. The Vorgr soldiers watched in horror as their ancient prisoner transformed before their eyes. Nara's humanoid shape expanded, growing brighter until June had to shield his eyes. When he looked again, she had become something magnificent, a swirling vortex of golden light, with patterns like galaxies spinning within her. At her center remained a face, still recognizably Nara's, but now infinitely more expressive and alive. "Stay behind me," Nara said to June, her voice carrying new depths of power. The Vorgr commander barked orders to his squad. Full assault. Contain the prisoner. Energy weapons fired from all directions. June tensed, expecting pain, but Nara extended her light outward, creating a shield around them both. The weapon blast struck the shield and dissipated harmlessly. "Your weapons cannot harm me now," Nara said, addressing the Vorgr. "The technology of your ancestors no longer binds me." The soldiers continued firing, their faces showing a mixture of fear and determination. June noticed something interesting. The younger Vorgr appeared confused, while the older ones seemed terrified. "Stop," Nara commanded, her voice booming across the mountaintop. "I wish no harm to any of you." The commander sneered. "The destroyer speaks of peace. Your lies fooled no one before, and they will not now." "Lies?" Nara's form pulsed with emotion. "You speak of lies when your empire was built on deception." The commander turned to his troops. "Do not listen. This is how she corrupts minds." Nara hovered higher above the mountain peak. "I will not fight you. Instead, I offer truth." Her form expanded further, and suddenly the air around them filled with images, projections of memories that played like recordings. June watched in amazement as scenes from the past appeared all around them. The images showed planets being ravaged by Vorgr forces, cities burning, people fleeing. Then they showed Nara, in her earlier form, helping evacuate civilians, disabling weapon systems without harming the operators, creating shields to protect the innocent. "These are my memories," Nara explained to the stunned soldiers. "This is what your history books do not tell you." The younger Vorgr watched with widening eyes. One of them, barely more than a youth, lowered his weapon slightly. "Commander Tark," the young soldier said, "this doesn't match what we were taught." "Silence," the commander, Tark, shouted. "This is enemy propaganda." Nara directed her next memories specifically at Tark. They showed his ancestors, Vorgr officers from millennia ago, discussing their plans. "We must make an example of the Alari rebel," one ancient officer said. "Her capture will serve two purposes: remove her interference and create a fearsome legend we can use to control the populace." Tark's four hands tightened on his weapon, but doubt showed on his face. June stepped forward, staying within Nara's protective shield. "Your people lied to you," he said to the Vorgr soldiers. For generations, they imprisoned Nera not because she was dangerous, but because she exposed their cruelty. "Who are you to speak of our history, alien?" Tark demanded. "I am Dr. June, a human from Earth. My species has only recently joined the galactic community. We have no part in your ancient conflicts, which means we can see them clearly." Another young Vorger soldier looked at the images still swirling around them. "Is this true, Commander? Have we been lied to?" Tark hesitated. In that moment of uncertainty, more soldiers lowered their weapons. Nera's form contracted slightly, becoming less overwhelming. "I do not seek revenge," she said. "I have had centuries to move beyond anger. What I want now is truth, and a chance for a better future." One by one, the younger Vorger placed their weapons on the ground. Only Tark and two older soldiers remained armed. "You betray your training," Tark hissed at his squad. The young soldier who had spoken first stood taller. "No, Commander. If these memories are true, then it is our ancestors who betrayed the truth." Jude moved closer to the edge of Nera's shield. "Throughout human history, we've learned that empires built on lies eventually fall. But it doesn't have to be violent. Change can come through understanding." Tark looked from his squad to Nera to June, his face twisted with conflict. Finally, with a gesture of defeat, he lowered his weapon. "What happens now?" he asked. "If what you show us is true, then everything I've believed, everything I've served, was based on deception." Nera finished gently. "But you are not your ancestors. You can choose a different path." The sun was rising now, casting golden light across the mountain peak. The broken fragments of Nera's chains had completely vanished, leaving no trace of her long imprisonment. "Your species is remarkable," Nera said to June. "In all my centuries, I never imagined my freedom would come from a race I had never encountered." "What made it possible?" asked the young Vorger soldier, curious despite his confusion. June looked at his own hands, still tingling from contact with Nera's energy. "Humans have something in our biology that interacted with Nera's energy in a way your ancestors couldn't predict. But I think it's more than that." "It is," Nera agreed. "Humans possess an empathic quality, an ability to see beyond differences, to recognize suffering and respond to it." June came to this mountain seeking knowledge, but stayed because he couldn't accept injustice. Tark scoffed, though with less conviction than before. "One alien's touch broke chains designed by our greatest scientists. Impossible." "Not impossible," June said. "Just unexpected. Sometimes the gentlest touch can break the strongest chains, if it comes from the right perspective." In the days that followed, change swept through the Vorger patrol ship. News of Nera's liberation and the revealed memories spread among the crew. Many younger Vorger, raised on stories of the fearsome destroyer, found their worldview shattered by the truth. June established contact with Earth, reporting his unprecedented discovery. The Interstellar Survey Corps responded with a mixture of excitement and concern. No human had ever before directly influenced galactic politics. "They're sending a diplomatic vessel," June told Nera as they sat watching the sunset from the mountain peak a week later. "Earth wants to establish formal relations with both you and the Vorger." Nera's form shimmered with amusement. "They will find it difficult to create a treaty with a single Alari." "You're more than just one person now," June said. "You're a symbol." Tark approached them, his posture still stiff but less hostile. "Our Central Command has finally responded," he said. "They are conflicted. Many refuse to believe the memories you showed us. Others are questioning everything." "Change takes time," Nera said, "especially for an empire built on certain beliefs." "Some of us wish to know more," Tark admitted, "particularly the younger officers. They call themselves truth seekers now." June smiled. "That's how it begins." 3 months later, representatives from Earth arrived on the planet now called New Beginning. They found a changed situation. A small settlement had formed at the base of the mountain, where Vorger truth seekers lived alongside human researchers. Above them all, Nera watched and guided. She had become both teacher and mediator, showing the Vorgr their true history while helping humans understand their new place in the galaxy. "We propose a formal alliance," said the lead Earth diplomat during the first official meeting. Humanity, the reformed Vorgr, and Nera as representative of the Ilari. "An interesting proposal," said the Vorgr representative, a young officer who had replaced Tark. "But what would be its purpose?" June, now serving as advisor to the Earth delegation, spoke up. "To build bridges. The galaxy has operated on fear and power for too long. Humanity brings a fresh perspective. The Vorgr bring resources and knowledge, and Nera brings wisdom and memory." Nera's form glowed with approval. "For millennia, I watched the stars from my prison, thinking connection impossible. Now I see new possibilities." The alliance formed gradually, not without challenges. Many Vorgr resisted the new narratives. Some humans feared involvement in ancient conflicts. But the movement grew. Across the galaxy, other imprisoned beings were found and freed. Ancient wrongs were acknowledged. New connections formed between species who had previously viewed each other only as enemies or resources. A year after his first climb up the mountain, Jun stood at its summit with Nara, watching ships come and go from the thriving settlement below. "Did you ever imagine this outcome when you were chained here?" he asked. Nara's form shifted in what had become her version of a smile. "Never. I had given up hope of freedom, let alone change. And now you're a diplomat, a teacher, and something of a celebrity across 12 systems. As are you," Nara pointed out, "the human who changed galactic history with a touch." June laughed. "I was just curious about some energy readings. Everything else was coincidence." "Nothing is coincidence," Nara said. "Your people have a saying that seems fitting. The right person at the right time can change everything." Below them, a group of Vorgr children played alongside human researchers' families. Above, stars appeared as the sun set, stars that were now becoming accessible to peaceful exploration rather than conquest. "We have a lot of work ahead," Jun said, looking at the vastness of space above them. "The alliance is still fragile. Old habits die hard." "Yes," Nara agreed, "but we have something powerful on our side." "What's that?" "The truth," she said simply, "and the power of unexpected connections." As night fell completely, Nara's light illuminated the mountaintop, no longer a prison, but a beacon. The place where an unlikely friendship had changed the course of history, proving that sometimes liberation comes not through force of arms, but through the simple power of one being recognizing the suffering of another and refusing to walk away. Throughout the galaxy, the story spread, of chains that held for millennia until broken by a human's touch, and of the new beginning that followed when truth replaced fear. It became legend, then history, then the foundation of a new way of thinking about the connections between all living things. And it had started with one curious human climbing a mountain, and one imprisoned being who had nearly forgotten how to hope.